All right, well, it is day 2 of Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference is taking place. That's in California. And joining us now from that conference is Yahoo Finance Tech Editor, Dan Howley. Dan.
Yeah, Josh, this is, day 2, as you said. Developers are still kind of milling around. Analysts and journalists like myself are also here. And there's some takeaways that we're getting from the event yesterday now. And so one of those is kind of based on Apple's approach to AI and how that's been kind of a slow trickle from the huge explosion that we saw last year with Apple Intelligence to what we saw this year, where instead of a new big splashy announcement, they had smaller bits of AI that they're weaving throughout their operating system. And it looks like that's going to be Apple's path forward, at least for now. Until we hear something about that new generative AI-powered Siri that it's supposed to come at some point either this year or next year, we're still not entirely sure. That seems to be the way that Apple can compete and potentially win this AI race that they have against the likes of Google and Samsung. I think one of the things that gets conflated because of the idea that AI is so large is comparing Apple's approach to something like a Microsoft, which obviously provides the majority of its AI services to enterprises. And yes, they do have consumers, but if you look at the balance, it's going to be on the enterprise side. And so they obviously compete with Google as well as far as smartphones, but really it comes down to the enterprise and what they can offer to advertising. So Apple's approach is going to be different naturally, but this way of kind of moving forward with the dribs and drabs, generally, it seems as though I got to see a few of these features they announced, really helpful updates. So it's not that, we're still seeing those, make emojis or things like that. But then there's also ways of adding functionality to existing apps with AI that so far seem to be pretty helpful for users.
Dan, here's my big question for you as a reporter who has followed Apple for a long time. Apple, not interested in being first, Dan. As you know, they are interested in getting it right and then succeeding in that market. So, and listen, that has proved to be a very successful tactic and strategy for Apple. Can Apple do that again, Dan, in your opinion, when it comes to AI?
I think they can, right? I mean, look, as you said, they've done this again and again. They were not the first with music players. I think the Microsoft Zune might have been before that, or maybe not the Zune, but there were things like mini disc players that tried to, make smaller music players, but then the iPod came out and it killed it. They weren't the first when it came to, smartphones or the idea of smartphones. There were ideas out there already, but they kind of just honed it and created the iPhone. And so same thing with, wireless earbuds and smartwatches or fitness trackers, what have you. They've done this over and over and over again. And it's their kind of MO where they let everyone trip over themselves, getting out the starting blocks, right, to be first. And then they kind of take their time and provide products that don't miss, or more often than not, don't miss, and give general utility to users. And I think that's what they're doing here, right? So, some of the offerings that they have on include the ability to, create spreadsheets very quickly from recipes that you may have, and you need to scale that up for different aspects of what you may be wanting to do as far as parties go and things along those lines. So I think that those are really helpful rather than, the whole idea of let's take pieces out of images. They also spent a lot of this event catching up, really. So they have, Google has what's called circle the search. Samsung also offers it where you can circle something on your phone that you take a picture of or from your screen and then be able to search for it really quick. Now Apple has that in their visual intelligence app, and that's a truly helpful feature. I use something like that on my own to search for something, a flower that I had seen, wanted to know if it was bad for my cats or not. It turns out it was, got it out of the house. This adds to that. So I think that strategy could absolutely pay off here. Wall Street obviously wants to see a big, explosive, splashy announcement. They're not getting that yet. We'll see what happens when Siri comes out. And if Siri is even helpful as far as users go, are we going to want to use that on the daily, or is it just going to be something that we kind of, use for a minute and then fall out of love with the prior Siri? And then these smaller announcements become the more important ones.
We shall see. Still a lot of questions after this event. Dan, thank you. Appreciate it. Apple announcing significant software updates at its annual Worldwide Developers Conference, including changes to iPhones, iPads, Macs, and watches. Joining us now, Ramon Llamas. He is IDC Research's Director of Mobile Devices and AR and VR. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just curious what you make of the announcements that we are getting so far. What stands out to you as the biggest announcement so far?
I think there's two major results coming out of this. Number one is Apple's move for greater cohesion. If you look at its products and more importantly its operating systems, you have one for the Mac, you have one for the iPhone, you have one for the iPad, and so on and so forth. Now Apple's taking that really smart move to bring more closer together, a lot more cohesive than what we've seen in the past. And when you're a kind of a user who lives within that Apple ecosystem, you can shift rather quickly and rather easily, going from one product to the next. And to do so in a way that the experience is just a lot more seamless and fluid and more intuitive. And that's not to say that the current paradigm is not any of those things. Absolutely it is. But it just makes that much simpler. That's going to be a feather in Apple's cap. The other thing is what we didn't see. And what we didn't see is like a whole bunch of steps where Apple really embraces that AI hype. Okay, we know for the last year or so that Apple's been kind of the laggard behind the Googles and the Metas and some of the other companies out there saying, okay, we're not going to be the first, but we are going to take our time. We're going to make it the best possible experience, even if it's going to take some time. So I think Apple's really just positioning itself for future success instead of saying, here, go out and get these OS upgrades and products immediately.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like this is going to drive any massive super cycle.
Not yet. Okay, because remember, this is a developer conference, and it's not so much a device announcement. But here's the thing, I think Apple made another smart move when I was talking about cohesion earlier, is that when they rename its operating systems according to the year, because we saw iOS 26, we saw iPad OS 26. That is a really good sign for end users to say, okay, am I on the most current one? And chances are, and this is my bet, that come September, the devices will take a similar route. We're not going to get, iPhone 17, 18, 19, etc. We're probably going to get iPhone 26, 27, 28, and so on. And, going forward, I think it's a small and subtle way to nudge that user to say, okay, here comes the new operating system. How old is the device that you have right now? Maybe it's time to upgrade. So I think, are we seeing anything for the hype cycle? No, but I think there's some subtle ways to get people to move onward and upward to the next device and operating system eventually.
And just curious, if you had a single adjective to describe these updates thus far, what it would be. We had Laura Martin with Needham already calling the event disappointing. What would you describe it as?
It may be disappointing to some because there wasn't any huge whiz bang type of announcements, and I kind of get that. But if there's one thing that I would describe this as a very calculated move by Apple. Okay, if you take a look at that entire AI race, and we can talk about the other companies that are really moving forward and placing big bets. But here's the thing, according to a lot of the surveys that we put together, Joe and Jane Consumer on Main Street USA, they acknowledge the presence of AI on these devices, but they're not really quite there in terms of, what's the value here? What is the point? What am I going to save? How do I benefit? And so Apple, because of its position in the market across multiple devices, taking a very, calculated stance not to rush into things and let all the other companies kind of suffer those slings and arrows of where things go well and where things don't go well, and ultimately what gets adopted. I think Apple takes a very calculated approach to saying, okay, we know AI is there, and we're going to be there too, but we want to make sure that this is a very polished and ready for primetime experience before releasing.
As I was looking through the press releases, and ultimately, of course, a lot of our viewers can see a truncated version of those press releases, compilation of the announcements made through a story that was published from our own reporting here. But one of the major things that kind of jumped out to me is how much they're also kind of leaning further into vision. What is the net effect of that, and what we're going to need to see on the device side in order for consumers to gravitate towards that as a viable option? Because the larger question seems like, what is the next device that replaces the smartphone?
Yeah, and Vision OS has certainly influenced a lot of the changes that took place across the different operating systems with liquid glass. Okay, and I think that was again a very calculated step by Apple. But acknowledge that the current or most recent device that came from Apple, the Apple Vision Pro, that was not for everybody. That was not for everybody. But it's not difficult to imagine that Apple is going to move forward with it and make some changes to it. And my bet here is that Vision OS is going to benefit greatly from Apple Intelligence that much more. Okay, to be able to recognize things contextually, and we saw some hints to that. With things like persistence and consistency within that Vision OS operating system. But ultimately, you're also going to need some sort of hardware to do that. And I don't think the Vision OS, the AVP Apple Vision Pro is not the device for everybody. I think that was really for, developers, deeply entrenched, enterprises, and some early adopter consumers. In order to get to Joe and Jane consumer on Main Street, USA, you're going to have to take that device, slash the price, give some experiences that are just much more simpler and intuitive. And by the way, you probably wouldn't mind wearing them out in public. I could wear these outside, no problem. Having an entire boxy headset on, not so much, but eventually, that operating system is going to influence what that experience is going to be, and to have that again consistent from one device and one platform to another is going to hopefully, push further adoption in the years to come.
Ramon, good to see you here this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you.